Welcome back, everybody. We are finally on our last episode of our 5-part series on the book of Acts and looking at apologetic and polemic insights we can get to better understand Christianity. And in this final one, I want to talk about how we can actually present the truths that we've just learned in the past 4 episodes to people so that they can understand it and that they can see what we truly believe and why. And so let's play the intro and then get straight into it. We live in a world where there is more access to information than ever before. Generations, young and old, are being exposed to radically different ideologies and opinions every day. It can be so overwhelming, trying to decipher what's true and what's false. But there is a way. Join me as we discuss some of the toughest questions out there about Christianity, the Bible, and culture. I'm your host, Nick Lackey. Welcome to the Garrison. Acts chapter 17 verse 1 reads, "Now when they had passed through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where there was a synagogue of the Jews. Then Paul, as his custom was, went into them, and for 3 Sabbaths reasoned with them from the Scriptures, explaining and demonstrating that the Christ had to suffer and rise again from the dead, and saying, 'This Jesus whom I preach to you is the Christ.' And some of them were persuaded, and a great multitude of the devout Greeks and not a few of the leading women joined Paul and Silas." I want you to imagine for a second a 10-story apartment building erupting in flames. Residents scramble to grab what they can and flee. But for those on the top 4 floors, the fire triggers a security malfunction, sealing the stairwell doors shut. Smoke fills the halls, and their only escape is through the windows. They peer out, desperate, and breathe a sigh of relief when they spot 3 fire trucks below. But their relief quickly turns to horror as they realize one crew is busy polishing the truck. Another is relaxing with the radio blasting, and the last crew is casually checking the tire pressure. Now, let me stop there and ask you this. What is wrong with what these firefighters are doing? The answer is that they are failing to fulfill their number one task as firefighters. And as Christians, we would look at these firefighters and condemn them for their incompetence, for their ignorance, for their failure to prioritize the lives of those in the building over the maintenance of their equipment. Yet, are we much better? I mean, how many of us Christians praise Jesus throughout the week and call him Lord, yet neglect to obey his great commission to us, to go and preach the gospel to every creature? How many of us are too comfortable in our pews that we can't leave the security of our church communities to go and proclaim the gospel to the lost? How many of us pray, "Lord, let your will be done," yet fail to answer our own prayer by going against the Father's will and neglecting to tell the lost of their need for Christ? When it comes to sharing our faith, the Bible is abundantly clear that this is the job of every disciple of Jesus Christ. 2 Corinthians chapter 5 calls us ambassadors for Christ. Matthew chapter 28 tells us to make disciples of all the nations. 2 Timothy chapter 4 tells us to preach the word and to be ready in season and out of season to do so. But why does the church, of which you and I, if you're a Christian, are a part of, fail to obey this clear command from Jesus? Is it fear? Is it lack of knowledge? Is it laziness? I mean, if you were a cancer patient who all of a sudden was given a free cure to your disease, wouldn't you then want to go and share that with the rest of the world? I mean, how much more should we want to share the free cure for the disease of sin and death with a world that is infected with it? Paul was a man who understood this sincerely. He wrote in his first letter to the Corinthians, "Woe is me if I do not preach the gospel." That's why we read in Acts chapter 17 that Paul reasoned with the Jews. He was a reasoner. He wanted the Jews to understand the gospel and to be saved from their sins. We must do the same. We must have a desire to reason with unbelievers that they might be saved from their sin. So how do we do that? Well, today I want to share 3 attributes that we must have as ambassadors for Christ. 3 things we must all be growing in order to imitate Paul as he imitated Christ. So get ready for them. Number 1. In fact, Alan Schleman from the ministry Stand to Reason defines the 3 things we need. We've got knowledge, which he defines as an accurately informed mind. Wisdom, in artful method, and character in attractive manner. So let's start with number one, knowledge. Knowledge means that we know what we're talking about. Imagine a brand ambassador for Nike who didn't know that they sold running shoes, or a national ambassador for a country that couldn't even speak the country's national language. I mean, as Christians, we need to understand what we believe and why we believe it. This doesn't mean you need to have all the answers to every question, but we should be able to clearly articulate the basic things like why we believe in God and what the gospel is. And the good news is, seeking knowledge is actually pretty simple. First off, we must start with the Word of God. Every teaching, every doctrine, everything we can learn about the character of God is recorded in this book. We need to start by obtaining information on the basic truths of Christianity, like who God is and what He did for us and why He did it. The Bible should be the first place we go to for knowledge about God. And look, the Bible is a large compilation of different literature. It's not a single book. Within its pages is historical narrative, wisdom literature, letters, apocalyptic literature, laws and commands, poetry, and more. It was written over the course of approximately 1,500 years and was written by prisoners, priests and prophets, fishermen and physicians, tax collectors and tent makers, slaves and kings. And all of their stories and testimonies are part of one overarching narrative of God's redemptive plan for humanity. Now, if you want to sum the Bible up in an acronym, you could use the acronym CRIME. The C stands for creation, R for redemption, I for intervention, how Jesus intervened for us, M for mission, this is the great command for us, so we're currently in the mission stage, and then E for eternity, which is what comes after this earth. As Christians, we need to be in the Word daily, searching the Scriptures and absorbing the truth found inside. I like how Ray Comfort puts it. He says, no Bible, no breakfast, no read, no feed. But we can also obtain knowledge about God through other means, such as reading books, listening to podcasts, watching movies, videos and documentaries, and listening to sermons. And there are other ways as well. But the point here is, are you someone that needs more knowledge of God? Then go and get it. Go and study the Bible. And there's no one who knows everything there is to know. So every one of us has a job to find out more. The second thing we need is wisdom. And here's where I want us to camp out a wee bit. Wisdom means that we are wise in the way that we share the knowledge that we have. Throwing all of the theological and apologetic information at someone without wisdom is like having all the water you need to put out a house fire, but missing a fire hose. We need to have tactics when we have conversations so that we can effectively communicate the ever so important life-changing truths to real people. Now, I use that word tactics as it comes from a book written by Greg Koukl, where he describes some key tactics to use in conversations, which I'm going to share. Now, there are various different tactics we can use when communicating the gospel, but I want to start off with an example of what not to do. And this comes from the film Nacho Libre. Now, I haven't actually watched it myself, but it's a comedy movie about a guy who cooks at an orphanage because he wants to provide better food for the kids. And so because he wants to provide better food, he ends up becoming a wrestler to try and earn money. Now, long story short, there's a scene in the movie, which I have seen, where him and his wrestling partner, Esquelito, are about to face their opponents, who are named Satan's cavemen. And this is what Nacho Libre decides to do, is basically his companion's not a Christian. He says he believes in science. So Nacho Libre, who's professing to be a Christian, he thinks, well, we'll have a better chance of defeating our opponents if we're both Christians or both baptized. And then in Nacho's, in his thoughts, he thinks baptism makes you become a Christian. So he goes to the head of his partner and he dunks it in water without him realizing. It's quite a funny movie clip when you watch it. But this is a horrible way of sharing the gospel. This is not a way to convince someone to become a Christianity. I mean, how effective do you think that would be at converting someone? Probably not very effective at all. I mean, perhaps you've had a Christian really try and shove the gospel down your throat. Perhaps you, as a Christian, have done this, where you've just kind of listed off Bible verses and just left them with people without any explanation or any compassion or anything like that. So, how do we share the gospel in a way which is both truthful and gracious? And how do we respond to the claims that other people are making? Another question for you is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you relish the opportunity to share your faith? Some people would say a 1, that most people would probably be on the smaller side of the scale. We freak out, we get sweaty, we get shaky, we don't know what to say, we choke up. But a lot of the time when we're in a discussion with someone, it becomes too much about who can say the most stuff in the shortest amount of time, or who's the loudest, and it becomes a wee bit of an argument. Other times we are bombarded with so many questions we don't know how to answer that we kind of fold under pressure and just want to get out of the room. And sometimes we freeze and forget all of the apologetics that we know. But there is a way to be cool, calm, and collected in our conversations, despite the amount of knowledge we may have. Greg Koukl calls this tactic the Columbo tactic. And it comes from an old TV show where there was a detective by the name of Columbo who would ask a ton of questions in order to solve the case. And Greg argues that we must do the same as ambassadors for Christ. So then, what kind of questions should we be asking? Well, number 1, he says that we should ask, what do you mean by that? The first question, what do you mean by that, is a clarifying question. And all it is doing is finding out what someone means when they make a claim. Perhaps you're having a conversation with someone and they say, religion is just make-believe. Instead of feeling like you have to go and defend Christianity and give all the evidence you can for it, you could simply respond with, what do you mean by that? Get them to explain and articulate what their views really are. And this is really important for a topic such as evolution, for example. I'm a Christian and I believe in evolution. Now, when you hear that, you think, what? I thought the theory of evolution completely goes against Christianity. And it does, but we have to be specific, because as a Christian, we can believe in what's called microevolution, which is small adaptations and kind of genetic mutations which happen between during the life cycle between parents and their offspring. And this is a valid thing to believe in, right? Because in Noah and the ark, we see that there were 2 of every kind of animal that were brought onto the ark, and now we have a whole lot of different species on this earth today, which means that there had to have been random adaptation and mutation, right? And microevolution is observable. It can be observed over a lifetime. And this is, it's very much a real scientifically confirmed thing that happens. However, macroevolution, which is what people mean when they say the theory of evolution, and normally what people mean when they say evolution in general, this is something which Christians disagree with because it goes against the narrative we see in Genesis, where God created the animals and he created humans and we didn't evolve from monkeys or anything. Anyway, there's more on macroevolution and microevolution and some other videos I've made and many other videos on the internet. But the point here is we must ask, what do you mean by that? Just for clarification. The second question that we can ask is, how did you come to that conclusion? Now, do you know the difference between a claim and an argument? Well, a claim is simply a statement. I can make the statement, I think Avengers Endgame is the best Marvel movie. But an argument takes it a step further and has reasons to back it up. So far, I've just made a statement about Marvel movies, but I could make an argument if I say, I believe Avengers Endgame is the best Marvel movie because you get to see the most amount of superheroes in a single movie. Now, maybe that's not a very good argument, but it's still an argument. I'm giving reasons. When people make claims, they need to back them up with an argument. If a claim is like a roof, then the walls are the reasons which hold the roof up and turn it into an argument. Without reasons, they can't hold up the claim. And there's something called the burden of proof, and it falls on the person who makes the claim. If you are only asking questions, the burden of proof will always fall on the other person, and it's their job to defend why they believe what they believe. I was at a club that I've mentioned on this podcast many times, a Jesus club that I run at my old high school, and a lady once said to me, "Don't Christians think that we should kill all gay people?" I said, "How did you come to that conclusion?" She had no answer. You see, she kind of had heard something online or maybe heard some rhetoric from people who were anti-Christian and just assumed that that's what we believe. But all I had to do was say, hey, how did you come to that conclusion? I didn't mention a single other thing about that. So that's a powerful question we can ask as Christians, and it places the burden of proof on them or on people who are making claims and questions against Christianity. Asking this question means that the other person has to defend why they believe what they believe. And a lot of the time, this can cause them to start doubting their own beliefs. I mean, for they are only repeating things they have only really heard in the culture and haven't really put serious thought into it. So the first question is clarifying what someone believes, and the second question is clarifying why they believe what they believe. Now here's the thing. Notice how you haven't had to say anything except for the first two questions so far. Using these questions, what do you mean by that and how did you come to that conclusion, is an excellent way of determining how far you want to get in the conversation. Perhaps this person is really smart and they've done their research and talking about things that you don't really have a clue about. Perhaps they're raising some really challenging questions and ideas that you currently don't have a response to. And that's okay. In fact, that leads to another great tactic. And this fantastic response you can give when someone makes a claim or asks a really tricky question is to just say, I don't know. And knowing you have the option to say that takes a tremendous amount of weight off your shoulders, right? I mean, you can just say, I don't know, and you could acknowledge their point and thank them. Hey, that's a really good question. Thanks for making that point. And then you can ask them if you can think about it and get back to them. Just be like, hey, that's a good question. I've never thought about that. Can I look into that and get back to you? And thirdly, go and research it and go and find out the answer to that question, because there will be an answer out there. And then get back to them and you can start a convo after and say, hey, I was thinking about that conversation we were having a while ago. So, what do you do when you're ready to finally start sharing and make some of your own points? Perhaps they have defended their view, but you see some clear flaws in their logic. Well, again, you can actually make points by asking questions. Here's an example. And this tactic can really make people build an argument for you. We talked about, on our first episode in this series, we talked about the cosmological argument. So we're going to go through this argument in the format of asking questions, just to show that you can make some pretty powerful points in the form of questions. Perhaps you ask someone, hey, does everything which begins to exist need a cause? Or does everything which began to exist need a cause? This person's going to look back and say, well, yeah, obviously. Then you could say, well, does the universe need a cause? And then logic and scientific evidence would lead them to say yes. And then you could say, well, do you think it's more reasonable to say that nothing caused everything or that something caused everything? And you're kind of leaving the ball in their court to answer that question. And it's really powerful in making people think as well. Now, something created everything is the obvious answer. And then you can kind of just go from there and show that Christianity is the true worldview by asking questions. But already just by that line of questioning, you've shown that there must be a creator or something which caused the universe to begin to exist. Another question you can ask instead of making a point is, have you ever considered, and you could be like, hey, have you ever considered that the tomb was empty after Jesus rose again from the dead? Have you ever considered that Christianity might be true because the disciples went and died for what they knew to be true or false? Ask them in that format. So to sum up the section on wisdom, use tactics, ask questions, and this way you will be in the driver's seat, steering the conversation and remaining calm. And finally, character. Character means that our walk matches our talk. Hypocrisy will turn an eloquent, powerful message to sludge. If people see that our character doesn't agree with the messages we are proclaiming, our arguments won't make a dent. Character is the foundation upon which we are able to have these conversations in the first place. Statistics show an alarming amount of non-Christians see Christians as hypocritical and self-righteous. Frequently, I was confronted at high school with people who saw the words of one self-professing Christian and then saw the actions of that same self-professing Christian, and it did more damage to that person's perception of Christianity than any apologetic argument to do to fix it. I want to finish by sharing a story, a fictional story, but it emphasizes a very important point. And it's a story I heard once on a sermon by a man called Ray Comfort, but here it is. The father and son once went on a camping trip. As they were pitching their tent, the father looked to the son and said, "Hey son, see that river over there? It's full of crocodiles. If you are going to fish, fish off the wharf." The son thought, fine, I'll fish off the wharf, and he did so for the next few days. Then he thought, it would be kind of exciting fishing amongst the crocodiles. I'll get in the boat and I'll be safe. And so off he went. He grabbed a boat, went out into the water, and began fishing. Now, things were great for a time, but after a little while, a crocodile came up near the boat, smacked it across the side with its tail, and tossed the boy into the water. The kid screamed in terror, and the father heard this and immediately dived off the wharf headfirst to go and rescue his son. He pulled him to the safety of the shore, but when the kid opened his eyes, he saw a horrific sight. The crocodile had draped his jaws over his father's legs, leaving him in bleeding shreds. Now, what I'm about to say is unthinkable. Imagine if that son turned to his father who was lying there, bleeding to death in agony, and said, "Dad, I really appreciate what you did for me by diving into the water and saving my life. But I really enjoyed being out with the crocodiles there in the boat. You wouldn't mind if I grabbed another boat and went out among the crocodiles again, would you?" If that son could think such a thing, yet alone do it, the blind fool hasn't seen the sacrifice of his father. If that kid would even get a glimpse of what his father had done for him, a sense of horror will consume him. He'll see the extreme lengths his father went to save him, and thoughts of doing that again would cause him to feel sick. If you are here as a professing Christian, you're listening, you are claiming to be one who calls Jesus Lord, but does your life reflect what your lips declare? Like that child, you too should have a sense of horror when you reflect upon the sacrifice of Jesus upon the cross. You'll realize that it was your sin that caused him to be there. It was your lying, your thieving, your blasphemy, your lust, your pride, your hatred that caused Jesus to have to die upon the cross, and thoughts of going back to those things should vanish from your mind. You'll look upon the twisted figure on the cross and say, "You did this for me? You, the God of the universe, stooped down this low for me? Lord, I want my character to be like yours, and I want people to see you and your love in me." Jesus tells us in Matthew chapter 5 to be a city shining on top of a hill, that we are the light of the world, and that our good works are to shine among men, that they may glorify the Father in heaven. Consider someone who would profess that they can bench 150 kgs. You'd look at them and think they might be lying. But if they went and did it, their actions are confirming what their lips declare, and we need to be like that as Christians too. So, how do we cultivate character? Well, here are some practical ways you can. Pray for a godly character. Ask God that he would make you more like Christ. Be regularly involved in Christian fellowship. The Bible says, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. Be involved in a church regularly, a Bible study, hang out with Christian friends. Get a mentor, someone older and further down the path than you, who you can talk to and get counsel from. And finally, stay accountable. Start an accountability group for things that you struggle with. Maybe it's pornography or your language or gossip. Or whatever the sin, stay accountable with other Christians. Those are ways in which you can cultivate character. And there's many more as well. So, to conclude both this episode and the 5-part series, you've heard arguments for the existence of God, for the resurrection of Jesus, for why Jesus is the only way to be saved from hell, and you've heard some points on why God allows suffering. And now today, I hope that you've picked up some handy tips on sharing the gospel and having conversations with people about Christianity. So, what now? I want to finish by sharing a quote by a famous preacher by the name of Charles Spurgeon as he talks about evangelism. Now, Spurgeon was an eloquent man who said things like, "Anxiety does not empty tomorrow of its sorrow, but only empties today of its strength." Whew. Very eloquent man. So for any uneducated people listening, like myself, it may be hard to understand this next quote from him, but it's very important. Are you ready? Charles Spurgeon said, "Brethren, do something, do something, do something." Now, do you understand what he was trying to say? Can you get a grip on what he's really trying to get across to us in this one? I'm saying this sarcastically because it's so simple. I'll continue the quote. He says, "While societies and unions make constitutions, let us win souls. I pray you, be men of action, all of you. Get to work and quit yourselves like men. Old Suvorov's idea of war is mine. Forward and strike, no theory, attack, forward a column, charge bayonets, plunge into the center of the enemy. Our one aim is to win souls. And this we are not to talk about, but do in the power of God. Mother Teresa once said, God has not called me to be successful, but to be faithful. And that is the mindset we must have as Christians as we go out into the world and proclaim the gospel. And if you are a non-Christian listening, particularly to this episode, guys, I have been trying to help Christians have conversations with non-Christians, maybe like yourself. If you have ever been hurt by a Christian who has come across negative or hateful, then I apologize. That's not the way that we should be coming across. We should be coming across with grace and truth. So forgive us for that. And I pray that you would encounter some loving Christians who can truly show Christ to you. So, maybe you've listened to all 5 episodes on this series. My prayer is that you go out and you use what you've learned for the sake of the gospel. And that concludes our episode and our series. So thank you everyone for listening. It has been a great joy to be able to do these, to be back on the Garrison. My plan for the future is I used to do these regularly, like weekly. That is not really possible for me anymore, just with other commitments, and I'm doing a bit of study as well. So my intention will just be to produce an episode somewhat regularly, but just as much as I can with other things going on. Thank you everyone for your support. Thank you for listening. Please leave a comment or a rating or send me a question through the email, thegarrisonpod@gmail.com, and I would love to hear from you. Otherwise, thank you everyone. We'll see you next time on The Garrison.